Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Clive Booth, President of the Oxford Civic Society. If you're not already a member, I do hope you'll join. It's easy to do so by Googling Oxford Civic Society and clicking on the Join Now button. The annual subscription is only £15 for an individual, or £25 for joint membership and £5 for students. Before introducing this evening's speaker, I'd like to outline how we shall proceed. Our session will last for about an hour. The talk will be approximately 45 minutes, after which there'll be an opportunity for audience members to ask questions or make comments. We'll be recording it so that it can be accessed later on YouTube. During the talk, your microphones will be muted. However, you can submit your questions or comments at any time using the chat facility, which, depending on the type of device you're using, will be either along the top line or the bottom line of your screen. At the end of the talk, my colleague Ian Salisbury, who chairs our programme group, will take over from me for the question and answer session. So now to our topic for this evening, the Railways of Oxfordshire. Some time ago, I came across a map which displayed the railway network of Oxfordshire in about the year 1900. I was struck by how quite small communities were linked to their local towns and beyond by a sophisticated railway network. If only we had such a network today. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from an acknowledged expert about Oxfordshire's railway history. I asked a friend who's a railway enthusiast to suggest someone who might give such a talk. And without a moment's hesitation, he said Laurence Waters. You only have to see the list of Laurence's published works to know that here is an expert of national, if not international, standing. I counted over 40 titles of his on the internet. He's also the honorary photograph archivist for the Great Western Trust at Didcot, a role I know many people would love to take off him. So we're exceptionally fortunate to have somebody who can speak with such authority on the railways of Oxfordshire. And it's my pleasure to welcome Laurence this evening. Over to you, Laurence.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The first mention of a railway branch to Oxford is on the 1833 prospectus map for the Great Western Railway. At this time, they were trying to raise money to build the line between Paddington and Bristol. They had to raise over £3 million, which is a considerable sum of money in 1835. And they were having trouble doing it. So for some reason or other, the branch to Oxford was omitted. And it wasn't until 1843, after 2 or 3 aborted attempts to build a railway to Oxford, that a bill was passed. The main line between Paddington and Bristol opened in 1841, designed by Brunel, 7-foot gauge, wide gauge. He also was involved in the construction of the Oxford Railway, the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway, and the Oxford and Birmingham Railway, all local. The first station to be opened in Oxford or Oxfordshire was at Steventon, which at this time I think was probably in Berkshire. But anyway, it was the nearest station to Oxford. And there is a picture of Steventon. At the time, it was quite busy. In 1842, there were over 12,500 tons of goods moved from Steventon, and 77,000 passengers travelled to and from Steventon. And the Oxford Mail for London also moved from Steventon and eventually to Bristol, of course. Between 1842 and 1843, the Superintendent's House at Steventon was actually used as the headquarters of the Great Western Railway, being approximately halfway between Bristol and Paddington. Anyway, the Oxford Railway was formed on the 11th of April 1843 with a £120,000 share issue, which was raised to construct the line. This was formed mostly of GWR money, because when the line was eventually started, the Oxford Railway Company was absorbed into the Great Western Railway. This is an early lithograph print of the station at Didcot. The junction station was at Didcot. And here is a Great Western service from Bristol running into Didcot. And on the far right, you can see the platform for the Oxford branch. And today, that platform 5 at Didcot, is still used as the branch platform for Oxford. In fact, I travelled from there on Tuesday. The line was 9 miles and 57 chains. It was cheaply built, really, although there was not much, no major gradients, no tunnels, but it crossed the Thames twice. And this is the type of bridge that Brunel constructed to cross the Thames. This one is actually at Shiplake, near Henley, but would be very, very similar to the 2 bridges that cross the Thames, one at Newnham and one at Appleford. It terminated in an area of land at Grandpont, and here is another lithograph of the station. You can see here the whole thing was probably constructed of wood. The girder structure you can see was probably cast iron to hold the roof up, and the 2 platforms were staggered. This platform where the passengers are waiting for the train would be up the up platform. In the background is the down platform. And then on the large building that you can see there on the left-hand side was the goods shed. Because, of course, as soon as the railway opened, goods started to be carried by train, not just passengers. The line where you see the locomotive runs right the way through to the side of the River Isis or Thames at this point. And there it is running there, a broad gauge line. And there you can see the station. This is a very early picture from the Oxford archives. And you can see here down on the right-hand side, it says road leading to Great Western Station. And everyone used to think, well, that was obviously Western Road, but it isn't. Western Road wasn't named until the housing estate was built long after the station was closed. The first locomotives that ran on the railway were probably the Firefly class, designed by Gooch. And here's one here, the locomotive Argus. It's a 2-2-2 wheel formation and a small tender. And there you can see the driver out in the open. The unusual thing on the back of the tender is what's called an iron coffin. And on that, the travelling porter, or guard, as he became known, would sit facing the train. So he was responsible for the safety of the train. If a carriage broke away, as they often did, or there was a fire, he had to warn the driver. He didn't turn around. He had a cable which was attached to the tender, which was attached to a bell. And when he would pull, if there was any problems, he would pull that wire, the bell would ring, and the driver would stop the train. I must point out that these very early locomotives did not have brakes. So the only way of actually stopping the train was to throw the engine into reverse. And you might say, well, how did they stop at stations? Well, they approached the station very, very slowly and then put it into reverse. There were 2 stations initially on the line. There was one at Appleford. Now, this is Appleford Halt that wasn't built until 1933. There's the bridge, the original bridge at Appleford. And the station was just on the other side of the bridge. It actually didn't last very long and was closed within about 3 years or 4 years of the line being opened. I wouldn't have thought it was used very much. But the other station on the line was Culham. And here is Culham, taken probably around the turn of the last century. Very nice station, the signal box with the ivy and everything. And the building that you can see in the centre is now listed, and that is not in use now as a station. It's used privately, and there's a new platform, but it is basically as you see it there. rather nice Brunel designed brick building, similar to the station at Charlbury, which is actually constructed of wood. Now, the idea was really to carry the line forward. Brunel was trying to get to north into Wolverhampton, Birmingham and Wolverhampton. And the Oxford and Rugby Railway was formed to construct a line which would connect with the LNWR at Rugby. That company ran into problems and it was eventually taken over by the Oxford and Birmingham Railway that completed the line. So the north part of it that went across country was abandoned, and the new line carried on up through Leamington to Birmingham. For a short period of time, the line only ran as far as Banbury, where it terminated, until the line was constructed further north. It was a single broad gauge line, and the trains still used the old Grand Pont station, and they would reverse at a place called Millstream Junction. This is a picture courtesy of Liz Woolley, who let me use this, and it shows Millstream Junction in the centre at the bottom. So that the new line was constructed slightly higher, hence the lake at Hinksey where they got the ballast from. So there you can see the new station, the GWR station north. Just north of the Red Bridge is a particular area that always flooded. There's lots of instances in the Oxford Journal that mention the floods, and that was probably caused by the Hinksey stream, which ran adjacent to this and was regularly flooded. This is looking north, and if you look, you can't see it, but if you look very carefully at this picture, it's taken in about 1894 with these guys on a pump trolley. You can see the gasworks in the background because the line sweeps around here, and on the left-hand side, that's the site of Hinksey Yard. When they put Hinksey Yard in, they did put some culverts in, but it didn't really stop the flooding. And the flooding here wasn't stopped until they did more culvert work in 2015. After some severe delays, they had enough, I think. This picture, taunt picture, shows the area of the station. This is in 1875. This is the flood at the station area. But what it shows is the level crossing, which is behind the lamppost on the left. That was there until just a few, well, probably 15 years ago, they sort of stopped using it. There you've got the bridge, flooded right up under the bridge, a punt, which was used to ferry the people across to the station. But what's the most interesting thing on this picture is the only known photograph of the old 1852 station that was built by the Oxford and Birmingham Railway, and with the overall roof. And here is a close-up of that station. So if anyone finds another one, please let me know. The line, as I said, ran through to Banbury. Now, we've had the lithograph of Didcot, and we had another one of Oxford, and this is one at Banbury, supposedly in around about sort of 1860. So you look at these and you think, are they really that accurate? Well, here is Banbury, taken at the turn of the last century. So you can see they're not too bad, actually. It's just looks a bit narrower. But the station at Banbury, again, is very, very similar to the station at Oxford. The only difference being that at Banbury, there were just 2 tracks going through the station, 2 broad gauge tracks, whereas at Oxford, there were 3. My crib sheets ready. In 1861, the line between Oxford and Paddington became standard gauge, or had standard gauge put down. They were still broad gauge, but this was the first locomotive here that ran between Paddington and Birmingham, the first standard gauge service. with the people sat on it. I don't know where this was taken, somewhere or other, but there's the locomotive there. And it was taken on from Oxford. This changed at Oxford. It was taken on from Oxford to Birmingham by the fellow class member, number 76. But there again, there's a really nice old locomotive that hauled those first trains. The other railway that came in was the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway. And again, this was built as a mixed gauge line, only partially broad gauge, because they sort of ran out of money, and the broad gauge never really ran on that line. It was mixed gauge right the way through. So for a time before it came into Oxford in June 1853, and for a time the Worcester and Wolverhampton trains terminated at Oxford, but after 1861 they were able to run right the way through. They did run for a time through to Euston, but that's another story, and I haven't got time to go into that tonight. They became the West Midland Railway in July 1861, and from the 1st of September 1861, you had the broad gauge, the standard gauge services running right the way through, as you did to Birmingham. The broad gauge trains still ran to Birmingham. There was one broad gauge service a day towards the end, but after the gauge was removed in 1869, north of Oxford, and south of Oxford in 1872, the broad gauge ceased. The Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway joined the Oxford and Birmingham Railway at Wolvercote Junction, and there is a picture of the junction taken in early BR days with a freight train coming through from the Birmingham direction, and the line diverging away on the left-hand side behind the signal box. That's the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway. In 1900, the Great Western and the Great Central opened a line between Colworth Junction on the Great Central and Banbury Junction, and from that date you had cross-country trains coming into Oxford from the north to the south. Sheffield, York would come in and run down to Bournemouth or Hastings or whatever. And this picture taken pre-1923, so it shows a lovely Great Central locomotive there, number 264, I think it is, Great Central Atlantic, on a service between Bournemouth and Sheffield. By the turn of the century, or just before the turn of the century, the London services were operated using these lovely Queen class locomotives. And there's one parked at the end of the platform at Oxford, en route to London. And again, nice large wheels. And by the 1930s, some of the trains were operated using these Bulldog 440s. This particular one is Goldfinch 3446, which was for a short while allocated to Oxford. And that's approaching Hinksey on its way into Oxford. And again, there's no Hinksey Yard at this time. Now the station itself at Oxford, it was built quite high up, as you can see there. That's looking from the Botley Road, looking up on the downside, with the station at the top of the hill. Probably the turn of the last century, with the horse-drawn cabs. And in the background, you can see the cab building, which is still there. That was built by the Great Western because complaints that the cabbies were having to stand outside in all weathers. So they had a nice building built for them. The platform of the station, again, taken around the turn of the last century. You can see the cast iron columns holding a wooden roof. In 1890, the overall roof was removed at Oxford and was replaced by these wooden station canopies. But the actual station, main station buildings remained very much the same. They didn't spend too much money, but they altered it, and it's well documented. and there's the station itself. On the little boy selling the papers is outside what was then W.H. Smith, but W.H. Smith fell out with the Great Western over what they were charging on their stations. And after that, the contract went to Wyman's. And Wyman's operated on Great Western stations for many years. And eventually they were taken over by John Menzies. And eventually John Menzies were taken over by W.H. Smith. And if you go to Oxford Station today, it's W.H. Smith back on the platform again. Looking down from the signal box, you can see there GWR Oxford Station, the Botley Bridge, and the station as it was right up until it was demolished in 1969. Wooden platforms, basically, 4 tracks, 3-track broad gauge, but when the broad gauge was removed, it gave space to put 4 standard gauge tracks through. And that's the way that it is today, really. And the platform, or a fair bit of the platform, on the downside is still the original platform. But the platform on the upside was mostly hollow and constructed of wood with cellars underneath, and that was removed and replaced with a brick-built concrete platform. The 1852 station had a refreshment room on it, and this is where the refreshment room was. And it was here until the station was demolished. During the 1890 improvements to the station, I think that the refreshment room was slightly enlarged. But there it is, taken in 1948. And at the bottom of the platform, you can see just underneath the milepost 63.5 miles, which is the milepost between Oxford and Paddington. And if you look at this very, very carefully, this picture, there's 2 Enfield 303 rifles parked next to the seat with no one in sight. You can imagine that happening today. The railway was always a big employer, and Oxford was no exception. At one time, there were nearly 1,200 men employed at Oxford. That's the loco department, the goods department, and the station department, and the signalling department. Here are some of them outside the station, probably in the 1920s. And looking down from the north signal box, you can see here I've put this in a train to Worcester on in the platform, and this is the up platform and the up arrival bay, and the station canopy, which you can see there, which was only removed with the station improvements 2 years ago, was put in 1901, and that was a cast iron frame. And looking down from the Frank Cooper's marmalade factory, you can see the station entrance again up the hill, and the road was tunneled down under the bridge when it was put in. And you see there the subway, part of the LNWR station, and Whiten behind the hill. The other railway that came into Oxford was the London and Northwestern Railway, built by the Buckinghamshire Railway Company, but actually the London and Northwestern, and opened here on the 20th of May 1851. It's built by Fox Henderson and Sons, and it used a design that Paxton had used building the Great Exhibition. But there it is, taken certainly after 1901, this picture, although they're all horse-drawn cabs, of course. But the building, you can see, the brick building on the left-hand side was not constructed until 1901. An early picture of the inside of the station. You can see there the low platform, and this is before 1888, this was taken, because the roof was altered, as you'll see from the next picture. And there's the old 4-wheel coaches that they used to use, very low-level coaches. It was rebuilt in 1907. The platform was raised, and there's a raised platform, and you can also see the new roof, the Northlight roof, which was put on for the station. This is a diagram showing the station circa 1865, the close proximity of the two stations. You've got the number 4, called the LNWR, number 2, the GWR. Number 3 is the broad gauge engine shed, which you'll see a picture later. And number 1 is the West Midlands carriage shed. The West Midland Railway, as I said, didn't have access south until after 1861. And until then, it had access to the south end of Oxford Station, and it built its own carriage shed. Coming out of the LNWR station, the railway crossed the Sheepwash Channel here and via Swing Bridge. If those of you who read the Oxford Mail today will see that they're now going to start to preserve the bridge, what's left of it anyway. And here is the bridge with the unique signalling system going over the bridge. So the bridge swung underneath the signalling so that the stuff can go under the bridge, and that gantry along the top. It's a pity that that wasn't saved, because that could be put back or at least displayed. But there we are looking into Rooley Road. This picture here, excuse me, shows how low the bridge is to the Sheepwash Channel, and the engine there, the LMS tank, is partially on the bridge, which is on the right hand side, and there is the girder structure into the yard. So the bridge swung around, and it's to open to allow whatever went past under the bridge. Not very much in the later years. In 1932, an interesting thing took place. Michelin sent over a vehicle with pneumatic tyres, with the hope, actually, I think, of probably running it on the LNWR or other branch line routes. This is the Great Western Station. You can immediately see that's got a problem, because you can only enter it from rail level, not very good. And the other problem was it had pneumatic tyres. And apparently it would not, the fog detonators on the line, it would not explode the fog detonators, so it would never have been safe. But there it is at Oxford in 1932, with people having a look at it. It did run around. You could have a ride in it. It ran down, I think it ran down to Reading at one point. But there you go. There's a picture of the station in LMS days, when it was after the grouping in 1923, when the LNWR came part of London, Midland and Scottish Railway. And you can see the large area on the right hand side, the goods yard, is full of coal wagons. Most of Oxford's coal came in to the LNWR yard, but loco coal came in from the Great Western, from South Wales, and domestic coal would have come in from the Midlands as well into the Great Western side. If you imagine at this period of time, you had the loco shed, which had 80 locos, you had the gasworks, and you had all domestic coal. There were thousands of tons of coal coming into Oxford every single week. Once it left Oxford, the railway levelled up with the Great Western. There's the Great Western, and there's a train leaving for Bletchley. The last service was the 4:35 p.m. service to Bletchley on the 1st of October 1951, hauled by that tank engine. I'm sorry, it's not a great shot, but it's the only one I've got. And after that date, the station was closed and all the trains ran into the Great Western Station from Bletchley and Cambridge. The station became a hostel for a short while, and there it is, but you can see the goods yard has still got lots of coal in it. This is a 1950 shot, 59 I think this was taken. And then the last shot, which I took from the top of you can see there, the whole lot's now become a car park, and it's now tyre services. The station was removed in 2000, moved to Quainton Road and reassembled. In 2002 it reopened, and now you've got the seared building there on its spot. And the only thing that you can tell is a plaque in the road to tell you that there used to be a station at this point. There's the, looking down towards Oxford, you see the gatehouse on the left-hand side, the Great Western Hotel, and alongside it, you can see the level crossing. And then the two ladies walking under the bridge. I don't know what the height was at this particular time, but it was 13'6". And this is a low deck bus. And those of you who are old enough like me to remember when you got on an ordinary bus, it used to say, as you got on, do not let your driver pass under Oxford and Cali station bridges. Because if it wasn't a low deck bus, that's what happened. There were two inquiry offices in Oxford. This one here is at 142 High Street. This was taken in 1928, and Thomas Lloyd was the goods agent. It was demolished in the early 1930s, and it's replaced now on the same spot would be the Edinburgh Woolen Mill shop, if it's still open. The other building was the London Northwestern railway station, railway booking office. Pictured here around about sort of 1875 probably. It closed soon after the First World War and became George Weeks Confectioners. And in 1954, it was Barclays Bank. But on both of these, you were able to go and buy tickets, you were able to deposit goods, collect parcels. It was a big business. The first branch line to open was the Abingdon Branch on the 2nd of June 1856. And here is a broad gauge picture of the Abingdon Branch with, we think, the engine, the 222 broad gauge engine Atlas. You can see there the width between the track, quite wide there. The triangle on the front of the loco denotes that that's working on a branch line. That's the old original station. And there it is, cheaply constructed, but okay. But in 1908, the 22nd of April 1908, while a goods train was being shunted in the yard, it was shunted by mistake into the coaches of the passenger train, the empty coaches, which were pushed into the station and flattened it. And there was the new station that was constructed, and that was there way up until the 1960s, when it was knocked down. A lovely station, really. There is the platform with the auto train running in and out, a 1930s picture. That ran up to 15 times a day between Abingdon and the new station, which was built at Radley in 1873. Now, I mentioned the station at Culham earlier on, and that was up until this station was built. That was called Abingdon Road. And then when this station was built, it was renamed Culham, because this is the junction station for Abingdon in 1873. That's looking towards Oxford. Still get trains from Radley, but the bay platform and everything is now a car park. The line stayed open. It was actually closed to passenger traffic on the 9th of September 1963, but stayed open for goods traffic. And here is the cars from MG, waiting, midgets and sprites and MGBs, waiting to be taken to Hinksey Yard, where the train would be reformed and would go to Grimsby or sometimes Southampton. But the MG car plant closed on the 24th of October 1980. After that date, there was only a Charrington's goods yard at Abingdon, and in 1984, the 30th of June, the whole lot was closed. And now at this point, you would be in Waitrose supermarket. The other branch was the Whitney Branch, opened on the 14th of November 1861, extended to Fairford. As the Whitney Branch train in the 1930s in the Up Bay. It went up the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway, and the junction was at Yarnton. It ran to the first station at Whitney here. but on the 14th of January 1873, the line was extended through to Fairford by the East Gloucestershire Railway, and this station closed and became a goods yard, and the new station opened at Whitney, which ran through, and then to Fairford, the junction. Again, this shot taken probably in the 1920s of the at Fairford. The original intention was to go right through to Cheltenham, but the company, as most others did at that time, ran out of money, and it finished in the field that you can see at the background. There were the buffer stops there. But a particularly good little line, and of course there's talk now about reopening the line to Whitney. Who knows? The next railway to open was the Wiccan Railway, Prince's Risborough to Oxford, on the 24th of October 1864. It was a broad gauge line when it was opened, but that obviously closed in 1872 as well, when the gauge was removed. That's Kennington Junction, looking towards Kennington, and there's a signal box. There's a West London freight, which ran from West London, from Paddington Goods through to Hinksey and beyond, coming off the branch. And it crossed the River Thames here via this girder bridge. Originally another girder bridge, originally a wooden bridge, and then another girder bridge, and then this one. The original supports of the bridge are still there. This was built much later because of the bridge was gradually sinking into the river. There's cars. This is the Bathgate, Cali to Bathgate car train, which ran. Station at Morris Cowley, named after works, opened in 1928. And this station is the auto train leaving Thame. And you can see there the overall roof at Thame, and that overall roof on the left-hand side, that stayed there until the actual line was closed on the 7th of January 1963. The line remained open until 1967, and it's still open as far as the mini plant at Morris Cowley. The other branch line was the Woodstock Line. This is the engine Fair Rosamond. It was supposedly named for a royal visit in 1896, a royal visit to Blenheim and Woodstock, but it may have been named earlier, we don't know. Only one station on this line, the branch there at Shipton, just on the right-hand side of the road bridge. That's the Banbury Road underneath. ran to a terminus platform, and you can see there, because the Duke put up the money for the line in the first place, it was always Blenheim for Woodstock, and that terminated opposite the main entrance to Blenheim Palace. How many talks. So that's the way the railway looked in the early sort of turn of the century. You can see the various branch lines with Oxford in the centre. Very busy station indeed. In the early 1900s, there was they operated a rail motor service, and here is the operation. It was the 1st of Feb 1908. It operated, new stations were put on the line to Prince's Risborough. Now you can see there, Hinksey Halt, Abingdon Road, Iffley Halt, Gartington Bridge, Horsepath Halt. They were all rail motor stations that were put in on this line. There was one north of Oxford at Wolvercote platform, looking down from the bridge, and there is a steam rail motor. If you want to see one of these, there's one at Didcot which runs. You can have a go on it, and there's Wolvercote platform. The whole thing was closed on the 22nd of March 1915. The LNWR also had a rail motor service that opened on the 9th of October 1906, and that actually lasted till 1926. There's one of the halts, that's Abingdon Road halt. You can see there on the left-hand side, the entrance to the platform was some steps, and the same was on the up platform, the London service passing through. And this picture was taken, storm damage at Kennington, but when you look at it very carefully through a magnifying glass, as I did, there is Hinksey Holt, the only known picture of Hinksey Holt. And that's obviously before the marshalling yard was built at Hinksey. There were 3 locomotive depots at Oxford. This is the broad gauge one north of the station. You saw that on the map. This is one of the big broad gauge engines, Hirondelle, which operated between Paddington and Birmingham, and on the main line, obviously, between Paddington and Bristol. And on the back there, you can see the iron coffin on the tender. These engines had brakes on the tender, in actual fact, these early ones. The other locomotive depot was this wooden depot there that stood just north of the station on the downside, constructed of wood. It closed in 1965 to steam, December 1965, and was demolished soon afterwards. But by the time December 1965 came, the thing had almost fallen down anyway. It had never ever been built from the time it was built in 1862. So that lasted an awful long time, that wooden structure. The railway had lots and lots of sports teams, and this is one. This is the Great Western Loco Department sports team in the Oxford Senior League. This is 1910, 1911 season. So some of those chaps were in for a bit of a traumatic time 3 years later. But there it is by the engine Sir Francis Drake. And towards the end, before this is taken in 1964, a year before the whole thing closed, taken from the top of the water tank, showing the loco shed, and the building is the coaling plant. The whole yard was altered during the Second World War. The other locomotive shed was at Rewley Road, and here it is. And that lasted until 1962. It was closed many years before that, but the water tank and the shed stood there empty for years and years. The Second World War brought some alterations, mainly in sidings and extra sidings and things, but one of the main ones was Oxford North Junction. There was no real connection other than a siding connection between the LNWR and the Great Western at Oxford. And here is, this is put in, this is taken during the war, and there's a coal train leaving on its way to the Midlands across Oxford North Junction. That was opened on the 3rd of November 1940. The yard on the goods yard on the other side was altered. That was removed for the extension of the engine shed, and that's closed on the September 1944. And prior to that, the new yard at Hinksey had been opened in 1942. By the 1940s and 50s, most of the services, the mainline services, were operated using Castle-class locomotives. This is a Worcester train hauled by a castle aptly named Sir Edward Elgar, and this was named on the centenary of his birth. Behind is the goods shed, the gasworks, and in the wagons are boxes of Morris cars. They're called CKD cars, completely knocked down, and they were cars in kit form, ready to go for export, dumped into coal wagons. Lots and lots of freight coming through. There's looking as another coal train arrives at Oxford. The gasworks were opened in 1818, I think it was, and they were expanded gradually. They closed in 1960, but during this time they were shunted. They had their own little railway system, and there is the gasworks behind, and you can see the piles of coal and their own sidings with the wagons waiting to go in. The old station was knocked down in 1969, and in 1970 this was put up, obviously at great expense by the railway. It was an awful place, but I suppose it did the trick. But that wasn't really very, very good. And in 1990, this was new building, a new concourse and everything was put in, much better, very light and airy, and that's what the station is today. The Norton line took over the services between Oxford and Bicester, which had been opened by Network Southeast, in 1987. And eventually they were taken over by Chiltern Railways, and Chiltern Railways expanded their services, completely revamped the line between Oxford and Bicester and put in a new junction. So then you had services running directly between Oxford and Marylebone. And there is the new platforms. This is on the site of the old, what was the up bay, and the site of the old broad gauge loco depot. And there's the new train crew depot and everything else that was built. Very, very popular and successful railway. Today, the services, steam is now gone. The services are operated by these Class 800 units, these dual power, diesel and overhead electric. And there's two of them at Oxford North. A couple of years ago, in 2018, the whole of the area was closed. All the sidings were revamped, new crossings put in, and you now can travel in either direction from the down platform. And of course, the buildings in the behind caused a big furore when they were put up, and there they are, blanking out what's behind there. Cross-country services now are operated using these. There's a service to the north every half an hour and to the south every half an hour. You either change at Reading or you reverse at Reading, and they go through to Manchester and to Newcastle. And there you can see the revamped sidings that they put in for the new units when they will eventually come. Freight traffic these days is in the hands of these Class 66 locomotives almost entirely, and lots and lots of container trains. There's no coal anymore. A few oil trains, but not through Oxford. So you've got the container trains, you've got the engineering services, which use the yard at Hinksey. There's the yard at Hinksey. It used to be shunted, hold 1,000 wagons and shunted 24 hours a day, but now it's used occasionally as an engineering yard. The line to Cali is still in operation, to the mini plant, and there is the mini train running through Radley. This is a very long train. It's got 10 sets of 5 wagons, and those hold 290 minis, double deck. And this runs between Cowley and Southampton Eastern Docks on a daily basis. And then there's another one in the evening that runs to Purfleet. We still get steam through Oxford in the summer, and I'll finish with a lovely picture of a castle up near Kidlington. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That absolutely wonderful presentation, Laurence. And I just love the idea of all those railway halts where people could get on and off the train in the Abingdon Road and so on. Wouldn't it be nice to have something like that today? I mean, that's one of the ideas the Civic Society is trying to promote, called the metroization of Oxford and Oxfordshire. Anyway, without more ado, I'll hand over to Ian Salisbury, who's going to handle the question and answers. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Clive. Yes, we've got a few questions. A couple have come in by text, but we've also had a couple of people raise their hands. So maybe if I could open the microphone for Nicholas Lawrence, who's asked a question. Nicholas, go ahead.
Hello, Laurence.
Hello.
Hello, good to see you. Thanks very much for the wonderful talk and all those absolutely gorgeous photos. Well, I've put my question in the chat box. I'll just repeat it then. Why on earth didn't GWR, in its great days, ever think of giving Oxford a worthy station for such a city, comparable, for example, with Bath or lots of others you could think of?
Well, it was actually, if you think about when it was built, that station in between 1850 and 1852, it was sort of built on the cheap, really. I mean, some of these other stations, I think there was the local authorities, the local landowners had a say in the way that they were built. But Oxford, I mean, it was for what it was fine. I mean, today, of course, the station it's so busy, it's incredible. There's talk now of putting a loop line around the back and making the down platform into an island platform so they can increase the capacity. So, but it was just, I think it was purely cost.
Purely cost, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And another question we've got from Lionel Rossington saying, do you have any information about the Chipping Norton and Hook Norton lines?
Yes, yeah, I was only allowed to talk for 45 minutes, so I could have talked for a couple of hours, as you probably may know. But yes, I mean, that's another talk, you know, on some of the other branch lines. But yes, the old Chipping Norton line, yeah, that's another talk.
We'll have to invite you back. We've got Chris Church as well. He's sent in a couple of questions, but maybe Chris, if I unmute you, you could ask those yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Laurence. My first question was a very simple one. Well, maybe not. But roughly, what's the largest number of stations Oxfordshire actually had, and about what time? And I'd also be grateful if you could say a little bit more about the rail motor system, because that sounds rather like the kind of light rail idea that some people are promoting.
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you, but I did work out at one time that nowhere in Oxfordshire were you more than 7 miles from a station.
Right.
That's so, but the number I can't, unless I'll probably sit and count them up. But and the I'm sorry, I can't answer that. But the rail motors, the steam rail motors, they were a single coach, but they could haul another coach. They were third class only, and they had the boiler was in the front of the coach. It was a vertical boiler which operated the wheels, and they could travel at 45 or 50 miles an hour. They were quite good, and they would operate on these all over the Great Western system, actually, not just Oxford. The Great Western built over 100 of them, but they operated in the Oxford area for that short time. I think the First World War probably put a stop to it, but if you want to go and ride on one and see what they're like, there's one at Didcot, which operates quite regularly, and you can see how they're made. They're wonderful things.
I think my question, if I could follow a supplementary, was how did they not get in the way of the bigger system, bigger trains?
Oh well, they were just went on another service. So on the service to Prince's Risborough, there'd be perhaps one morning service, early morning service using one of those, and then you would have an ordinary service with a loco and coaches, and then that would return. So they were integrated within the system. So they just didn't operate entirely on the line. They were integrated within the rest of the system. They weren't smaller. They were just they were standard coaches, standard height, platform height, but they had a vertical boiler, and they were able to run under their own power.
And it was economic for them to stop at all these halts?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's no problem with that. It's the number of people using it. So I expect during the First World War, perhaps people stopped using them, but they didn't come back. Whereas the London Northwestern system was ceased during the First World War, it came back afterwards. But it didn't finish in the area till 1926. But the Great Western didn't. But what the Great Western did do, they replaced those services with auto trains. So like the one you saw at Abingdon, with one engine at one end, one coach, and that would just go up and down the line, particularly at Abingdon, and the driver would just swatch. He could drive the train from the coach. So they replaced, the auto trains replaced the steam rail motors. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yes.
Thank you, Chris. A couple of other questions have come in from Andrew Pritchard. He says there used to be a cord from Yarnton Junction to the Bicester line, and the bridge over the Oxford Canal still exists. What would this have been used for? Do you know?
Oh, the cord, yeah, that was put in. I did mention that the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway and the West Midland Railway, when they couldn't get standard gauge access south of Oxford, they ran trains through to Euston, and that cord was connected, the LNWR with the OWWR at Yarnton Junction. So they were able to run round there. In later years, it was used by freight traffic, which didn't come into Oxford. And there was another little cord that was put in so that they could run into the sort of station at Rewley Road, but that was never really used. That became a siding, because once the standard gauge had been put south of Oxford in 1861, there was no need to run to Euston or anything. They came through, and then the OWWR and then the West Midland, as they became, they just ran into Oxford, and that's the way they did it, and they still do it today on exactly the same line. But the cord that went over the Woodstock Road, where the crossing keeper's cottage is still in existence, that's a private dwelling, that's long gone. And it came out approximately where Oxford Parkway is, by the bridge. Oxford Banbury Road Junction.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned the line being used still for the Cowley works. Robert Gerd says, what are the prospects for reopening the line to Cowley and even beyond for other trains?
Beyond Cowley, I think, is a non-starter. There's no point, because it connects with the Risborough line, if you went through, and the new Chiltern line through Bicester connects with the same line. So there would be no point. And you've got Horsepath Tunnel, which has got loads of bats in it, that's preserved, and it's a non-starter, that. But certainly to Cowley, there's no problem at all, I wouldn't think. I mean, it would take a little bit of money, because health and safety these days is not what it used to be. It requires a lot more health and safety, so it would need to be properly signalled and everything. But it would just be one train online, so a train would go up to Cowley and come back again. You wouldn't have two trains passing or anything. So yeah, there's no problem. I mean, I hope to see that in my lifetime. So that would be quite good. Okay, definitely.
A question from Simon Hunt, who says that the main GWR engineering works went to Swindon, but is he right in thinking that Oxford was a contender to house them at some stage? Do we know how close that was?
Yes, it was. It was up at the meadow, where the engine shed ended up. I think around that area. That was what it was. But the problem was that the land flooded. And there was a lot of hostility from the university for these Great Western Railway workers coming to Oxford. But it went to Swindon because the Swindon Corporation at the time made the land available to the Great Western for nothing to get the employment there, because it was logical anyway. The loco works were there, so you might as well put the whole lot together. So it was probably, it was not really on that it was ever going to come to Oxford, I don't think, if you read into it, but it was one thought at the time, but it didn't happen.
Okay. And a final question from Robert Gerd. When did the Didcot cord open, avoiding Didcot Station?
Oh, you've got the east and west cord. The west cord opened in 1880-ish. And the other cord, the loop for the station, the east cord, was opened in the 1860s, I believe. Yeah, I haven't got the dates off the top of my head, but yeah, there's a lovely, prior to that opening, there's a lovely thing in the Oxford Journal about one of the first excursions from Oxford to London that ran, and it had over 3,500 people on it in the end. Would you believe? And it says that it made a wonderful sight on the curve at Didcot with this long train with all these wagons, coal wagons, all sorts of things they put on it, running into Didcot. It's a wonderful description of it, and all these people clamoring to get on the train and whatever. No excursions today, I'm afraid.
No, sadly not. Just before I hand back to Clive, can you tell us what a fog detonator is?
Yes, if there's it's used by the signalling department as an explosive device, and it's clipped over the track. So if there's any fog or there's an emergency at night or anything like that, signal failure, then the signalman would go out of his cabin and put detonators along the track, several of them on either tracks. So when the locomotives go over these things, they explode. And it tells the driver there's a problem.
Cheekily, I'm going to ask my own question, Laurence. My friend Nick Saunders spotted in one of your photographs, which shows a rather unusual locomotive pulling a coal train, and wondered if that was one that came from the USA as part of the war contribution. Can you just say a few words about that?
Yeah, they were Class S 160s, and they came over during the Second World War, and they ran on the railways. They ran over in Europe as well, but after the war. But they came over and they were used as extra locomotives, because at the time, the trains, that there was so much freight during the war, stuff being moved around, that these extra locomotives were useful. And that's one of them that was running down, running through Oxford on a coal train over Oxford North Junction. I mean, that's probably, Oxford North Junction at the time was one of the most important connections that was ever put in at Oxford, probably. It's moved now. It's still an Oxford North Junction, but it's a bit further up. The old North Junction has gone.
Thank you very much. And for those who are curious to look for that locomotive, when we mount this on YouTube, you can revisit this fantastic talk. It really has been a privilege, Laurence, to hear from somebody like you with such rich experience and knowledge about such an important part of our transport history. So a very, very big thank you. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us tonight, and I hope you'll come back to us for our next talk on Tuesday, the 12th of January, which will be given by Gardener's Question Time panelist and Deputy Director of the Botanic Garden, Dr. Chris Thorogood. So from the Civic Society and my colleagues, Tony and Vernon, I'd like to wish you all good night, and thank you very much for watching.
Bye.
Bye.